I've used in the last section of my introduction, having all these wonderful contributions, some of them by contributors who've spent a lifetime on the Ramayana scholarship. Now, what I was trying to do, what Professor Shivaprakash was saying was, about the dots all around and trying to connect the dots. And in trying to connect the dots, I was trying to understand the processes that actually constantly caused the flow of the epic. So whose epic? It's everybody's epic, they say Sakala Hansama Ramu Biraje. And so intrinsic is the intrinsic structure of the epic. And what I mean is we're not looking at, we're looking at the language of that prose and poetry, language of the Mahakavya, which I'm calling, I'm sort of very quick to qualify that the intrinsic and the extrinsic are interlinked. But by that, I mean the structure of the Mahakavya, that it can be, assimilated in parts. So just one episode can then be taken like it happens in Vayankulit Kelantan, in Professor Ghulam Sarwar Yusuf's paper, where a part of it is then assimilated by the performers and mixed with the story of Banasura and Mohini. And then Vishnu dances and annihilates Nonduk, who is an earlier incarnation of Ravana. So, what I'm trying to say is this episodic assimilation, and then in some other cases, entirety of the Ramayana. So the Bhatti Kavya goes to central Java, and a large portion of the Bhatti Kavya is retained. But then Malini Saran's paper talks about the discourse on ethics that takes predominance in the central Javanese, old Javanese Kakavin. So that is what I mean by the interplay of the intrinsic and the extrinsic.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for that. We come back to Professor Shivaprakash. Professor Nandi, in one of his essays, says every society loves its classics, but they do not live by them. They live by the vernacular or the popular incarnations. So if you could speak a little more about popular incarnations that probably exist within Karnataka or a little beyond that.
First of all, I don't want to take seriously this divide between the classical and the vernacular. It's this kind of theorization comes from a kind of prejudiced mind which doesn't have access to all the facts. There's always been a continuity between the classical and the non-classical Martha and Desi throughout history. And this is best seen in this book. And also this concept of classic is come from Western thinking. It was not there in our languages. In the West also people have tried to understand what is meant by classics. T.S. Eliot said classic is the language of the imperial culture. So there has to be the maturity of language, the maturity of manners for a classic to emerge. So in the whole of European history, he considers Virgil's Roma as the only classic. But later, another British critic, Frank Kermode, questioned, and he said, a classic is something that is patient with time. It survives many, tricks that time plays on it. Shakespeare is a scholar. Of course, T.S. Eliot wouldn't have Shakespeare as a classic. It's not a classic itself. It's too immature. Shakespearean imagination is too immature, too savage to be counted among classics itself. So Ramayana is that great work which has great patience. It has survived so many changes. And one of the things he asked me, what is I like most about this book? I see all these chapters in this book, they make sense together. I can't tell one from the other. This is my experience of reading it. And what is very interesting is it problematizes many of our preconceived notions about tradition and our relationship with tradition. And most people Some people in a very crude way, some people in a sophisticated way, they think tradition has something to be preserved. Otherwise, it will die. And there is some origin in the past. Some people, for example, believe that Valmiki Ramayana is the original Ramayana. But the great Gujarati scholar who has edited Bhagwan Das, who has edited this Billy Ramayana, says Billy Ramayana is much older than classical Ramayana because it represents the matriarchic phase of history. Now, where is the origin of the Ramayana? If I venture a tentative answer to this question, it's not in the past, it's in the future. Everybody is trying to correct the story of the Ramayana. You know the Yakshaganas, when Sita wants to follow Rama into Vanavas, Rama says, no, don't follow me because it's very difficult in the forest and you are a princess, you've been a princess, enjoyed palace comforts, etc. And he tries to convince her very hard, but she doesn't agree. And Rama is very logical. But Sita says, defeats all his logic by saying one thing. Tell me one Ramayana where Sita didn't follow Rama to the forest. So I need to come with you. So because this has happened in the other Ramayana, this should happen here also. But if you look at the genealogy of the Ramayanas, it's more closer to the concept of genealogy than history. Here, sometimes there's repetition. There's also complete violation of the earlier expression. For example, I listened to one Ramayana rendering by an illiterate woman in Gubi Taluk, in a small village. And this is the last, this Rama and Sita, after Rama defeats Ravana, they come back in many Ramayanas. You have this Agni Pariksha, fire ordeal. In this rendering, Sita doesn't go through this fire ordeal. Instead, Rama says, look at that barren tree. If you are a Pativrata, you touch this, and it should bear so many fruits that all the hungry birds from all over the world should come and eat it. They should feel safe, sacred. Then she touches it. This is a very primitive ritual in India. It's called Dohara. It's there in Kalidasa's, Malavika. Yes, that's with the feet. This she does. And this story, which deviates from Valmiki Ramayana and other Ramayanas, there are so many of them in Karnataka. Kumar Vyasa, 15th century poet who wrote this Mahabharata, he tells us why he didn't write the Ramayana story. He says, there are so many Ramayanas all over, I can't put my foot anywhere. So I prefer to write another Mahabharata. There are so many, but most of them are gone. And most of them have disappeared. So this individual woman, I don't even remember her name, she gave this wonderful Ramayana. So tradition is not something given. Tradition is something, as Boris, that great Russian writer, said, we are recreating every moment. And tradition is not in the past. Octavio Paz, when he talks about the tradition of America, the tradition in the poetry of Walt Whitman, says, where is the tradition? It's not in the past, in the future. But where is that future? That is the future which is eternally deferred. So tradition is here and now, we're recreating. And this is the greatest lesson of the different reincarnations of the Ramayana. And one of the, dhvanis of this book. It's not overtly stated. It's what Sanskrit poeticians call dhvani. And Abhinav Gupta said, it's not just poetry which has dhvani, even Shastras have dhvani. So here is Shastra, which has dhvani like Kavya.
Fascinating listening to you. And very, very aptly put. Classic is something that's patient with time. I think that's a takeaway just now, what you said, and wonderfully said. We need another 40 minutes, Mr. Prasanna, he says. Yeah. So thank you very much. So, Suchandra, very quickly, you said about social distance but social nearness. So, what about was it only a part of the cultural imagination, or how much of it was part of the political imagination at that time? Because earlier, Ambassador Rao also spoke about very quickly. She makes a comment about cultural diplomacy. So, is there any historical evidence to that? Very quickly, and then we'll take one or two questions from the audience.
Yeah, very quickly. Yes, of course, this Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Jataka stories, these are now being taken as soft power to understand the nearness of between the two regions. So convergence, as I mentioned, was one of the very important things. Now, let me tell you just with one example. Like Ramayana, Jatakas were also very famous. So when I was talking about these episodes, that's how some episodes are like taken for some and important in some areas and how it is represented. Quickly, I will take you not to Ramayana, but to a Jataka story. And this is the Jataka story is about Mahajanaka Jataka. And the basic of the story is that he was a Mahajanaka, was a prince, and then he was banished from his kingdom by his father's, by his uncle. And then he tells his mother that I want to earn a lot of money so that I want to go to Suvarna Bhumi. Suvarna Bhumi was the El Dorado. So I want to go there, get riches and come back. So he went, and there was he braved the ocean naturally, crossed the seas, and there was a very storm and other things. So the ship was sinking, and he was quite intelligent, so he knew how to do it. So he jumped into the sea and went quite far. And then there is this is the Buddhist tradition, there is Manimekhala, goddess Manimekhala as the protector from the sea, just as we have Tara as the protector of this from the sea. So Manimekhala sees him, rescues him, brings him to Videha. This is in Mithila, in Bihar, present-day Bihar, brings him there, and then he's restored to the kingdom, and then he rules for a long time. Then he becomes an ascetic and he embraces Buddhism. So that is the whole story which we have in the Jatakas. Now, when this story is represented, and much later, in time and space, it is much later, but we find that it is wonderfully represented in various stupas in Cambodia, in Thailand, and even in the paper folios in British Library we have. Then, but what part of the story is represented? It is the story where Manimekhala saves Mahajanaka when he is ought to go to Suvarna Bhumi. So when we look at Ajanta, we have this story of Mahajanaka. But in Ajanta, it is the story when he becomes the king, rules nicely, and then embraces asceticism. So here is the clue that for the Southeast Asian people, in their worldview, they wanted this story because it was related to Suvarna Bhumi, their country. And so they actually translated these stories, and even in the 16th century, 17th century, you have these representations. So therefore, when these stories are evoked, these are kind of a soft power. So, when we traveled, both me and Parul, we have extensively traveled in regions of Southeast Asia. And I remember in Myanmar, they are looking at one single brick and say, this is Mauryan time. We say, no, it is not direct, but they won't listen to us. So because they are so much into this cultural convergence, the nearness. So it is the social nearness. They feel that we had the past was there. We were very close. And this brings in the question of, I'll stop with that, the Bay of Bengal community. So this is the Bay of Bengal community we don't have now, but at that point of time, there were certain things which actually formed the Bay of Bengal community.
Thank you very much. I think it's just heating up, and I wish we could just take it forward. Maybe one question from the audiences, if there's any.
Thank you for the book. Actually, I wanted to know about the Southeast regions in South India, a story about the Ramayana as well. But during the talk, I found one more interesting thing about the origin of Ramayana. In manuscript is around, you said before Valmiki as well, there is someone from Gujarat who written about it. Can I know about that one?
He's a famous folklorist from Gujarat, a tribal lore expert. and he edited the Bili Ramayana and Bili Mahabharata in Gujarati. It's published in Gujarati, not yet been translated into Hindi or English. I have seen the performance of this Ramayana in Bili village in near Khet Brahma in Gujarat. And he has spoken on this in several seminars.
So last word from you, Parul. Last 1 minute about if you would like to say something, and we come to if you would like to respond to something.
No, I think that three seems to have been a good number for this book. I was just thinking about it when I was listening to everyone, and also to see the 3 sections, yeah, visual, literary, and performance cultures. And in the joining of the dots and in the connections also, there is not just the connection across space, and not just the connection vertically, from the ancient to the contemporary, as a continuous flow seems to be the thing. But the number 3 is the Margi and the Deshi that we were talking about. That there is this continuous dialogue between the folk and let us say the more elitely patronized with and therefore they develop a more sophisticated grammar of expression. So this kind of a vertical integration also, and in what is called the vernacular now, the vernacular in the South Indian traditions and the vernacular in the Southeast Asian traditions actually comes so close that sometimes I feel that the oral traditions in the vernacular have had a much greater impact than we are willing to accord credence to. So that's about all. And much gratitude to everybody who has been involved with this book and to this wonderful audience here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Professor Shivaprakash, for being part of it. And thank you, Suchandra and Parul, for being a part of this. Thank you very much, audience, for being with us as long. We have something quickly to conclude. I think I invite Mr. Prasanna.
Just I would like to thank you for wonderfully moderating this session. Thank you very much.
Big applause for Neeta Inamdar, and a big applause for Professor D.S. Achyuta Rao's son, Mr. D.A. Prasanna.
So I request Professor Inamdar to hand over a collection of books to the panelists.